Before we begin, it's important to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I also recognise Indigenous peoples' unique and ongoing connections to these lands and waters, as well as the systems of law and justice that have existed here long before colonisation. Sovereignty was never ceded. Thank you all for joining me this evening. My name is Dylan Glatz, and throughout 2025 I served as the Postgraduate Director of the Monash Law Student Society, or the LSS. In terms of membership, we're one of Australia's largest student societies, and so we've hosted hundreds of events annually. Of course, one of these is one of them. Suffice to say, it's been a very busy year, and I thank the Postgrad Executive for their support and leadership over the past 12 months. Although my term has since concluded, this evening marks the first in what I hope will be one in many in a continuing seminar series that partners the LSS with the Centre for Commercial Law and Regulatory Studies, or CLARS. This series aims to provide a fairly informal opportunity for engagement with commercial law policy issues. If you have questions at any time, jot them down and please feel free to put up your hand. Claire's very comfortable with responding as we go along, so do pitch in. The idea for this series first came about in July of this year when I undertook a commercial law elective that was taught by Professor Jennifer Hill at Monash's Prato campus. Borrowing from my beloved Tina Turner, the opening slide to our first lecture asked, "What's corporate governance got to do with it?" Quite a lot, actually. It was from that moment that Professor Hill and I knew that we would be getting along just fine. After months of conversation and coordination, we now present to you the inaugural LSS-CLARS joint seminar, Antisocial Business Models. Thank you all for your attendance and support. I'll now hand over to Professor Jennifer Hill, who will introduce our guest speaker, Professor Claire Hill, who's visiting us.
No relation.
Everyone said, just ask your sister along, and I said no. Dylan, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to have Dylan in my class in Prato in July, and we just thought, yeah, let's do a joint event between CLARS, the Centre for Commercial Law and Regulatory Studies, and LSS. So we're super grateful to LSS. But it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Claire Hill. Claire and her husband Eric. They only arrived in Australia yesterday in Sydney, and weather was beautiful and balmy and just delicious. And then they came to Melbourne today, and this is weather that everyone in Sydney thinks we have all the time in Melbourne, but we don't, do we? It's usually delightful. So I'm really very, very happy to be able to welcome Claire and Eric to Melbourne. But I saw them only, 3.5 weeks ago, because I was actually in Minneapolis for a fantastic conference that Claire organised. It was extremely interesting, and she's a very iconoclastic, eclectic. I don't really know what all those words mean, but I think they apply well to her without knowing that. I've known her for many years because our paths have intersected at conferences mainly in America, I guess. I don't know that they've intersected in Europe, but maybe.
Maybe.
So she's a very well-known and eminent corporate law academic. She teaches corporate law, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, contract law, and law and economics. And she's, very influential in sort of looking at law and psychology and, issues that really are often overlooked in corporate law. And so she's an Associate Director of the Institute for Law and Economics and affiliated with University of Minnesota's Centre for Cognitive Sciences, which was something that came out in the conference. Now, Claire, I was just looking at your bio here. I didn't even know where you got your degrees, but she has a BA and an MA in philosophy from the University of Chicago, and a JD, summa cum laude. I never know what those words mean either in American academic life, but that sounds very, very good, from American University of Washington College of Law, and LLM and JSD from Columbia University School of Law, where she was an Olin Fellow. And the Olin Fellowship is very much law and economics, right? So Before she became a law professor, Claire practiced in corporate law at a number of very eminent firms such as Milbank Tweed in New York and Dixon Shapiro in Washington. She's taught at Boston University, George Mason University, Northwestern University, Georgetown, and now at University of Minnesota. So this is her first visit to Australia. Thank you all very much for coming along to hear her. I won't say what an engaging speaker she is, because that she is. Over to you, Claire.
Okay. Well, first, thank you, all of you, for coming. I hope that things will be at least interesting, better yet, edifying. I do apologize that I wrote this very much with a U.S. perspective. It's one of the most obnoxious things about the U.S. that we are able to get away with doing that. And I will admit that I take semi-full advantage. And I look forward to being told about A, I'm all wrong in Australia. I suspect not. Or B, here's even better Australian examples to prove your point, which again I would welcome. Second, thank you so much, both of you. I've known Jennifer and been an admirer of hers for forever and ever. Many things to say on that front, all theme and variations. Third, that someone should apologize to somebody from Minnesota for their weather is amazing. Minnesota is famous for having some of the worst weather ever, and that reputation is very well deserved. In January, I say every day, why does anyone live here? You would walk outside for more than 10 seconds, you would lose your nose. Really, truly, honestly, because it would fall off from frostbite. So it is stunningly cold and icy for a while. You don't see the pavement for a while. A little wind is a little wind. A medium amount of wind is still a medium amount of wind. None of this compares to ice on the ground. The name, by the way, that Jennifer was using words like iconoclast. My dean actually had a different term for me. He called me a whirling dervish, which I hadn't heard before, but I welcome. I mean, I'm not going to whirl, probably for the best. And boy, if I had known about Tina Turner, I so would have done that. I am sorry. Next time. Okay, so with all of that, let me talk to you about antisocial business models. I have a contract with Cambridge for this book, so in a few years, look for it. And I also am taking the great privilege of law academia, especially U.S. law academia, in being so heterogeneous in terms of what I can think about and what methods I can use to think about it. I went to a psychology conference and I thought, oh, this is great. I'm so interested in many things in psychology. And there was a panel on something called the tip of the tongue moment. It was really called that. And all of the people said, yes, I have read the corpus of the tip of the tongue scholarship, and here is my contribution to the tip of the tongue scholarship. And what this was about was people who were thinking, it was just on the tip of my tongue. They had like a whole mini field, and if you wrote in it, you had to cite the 30, 40, 50, 60 articles on it and make some little pokey incremental advance while summarizing everybody else's stuff. So when I ask such people, do they want to be part of my Law and Rationality Institute, they jump up and down with excitement and glee. They don't want to be writing about the tip of the tongue moment either. They want to be thinking about policy stuff and using their cognitive science smarts to that end. And law schools in the US, to some extent in various other places, not so much in civil law countries, but more in common law countries. We can do this. We can say, let us bring all sorts of interesting ideas from other fields to bear on problems that law and policy makers are concerned about. And what problem could be worse than businesses doing very bad things? So, of course, given the subject, I've got some examples. Let me figure out how to do this. Here we go. So, these are examples of things that get people very upset when businesses do them. These subscription traps, you sign up for something and then somehow you've got the magazine for 20 years even though you only want it for the trial basis. This other one, I'm fascinated by surge and dynamic pricing. I had no idea that Wendy's thought about it, that if you got your hamburger during peak time, it would cost you more than if you got it at a time when nobody else was interested in hamburgers. This really gets a rise out of people. And this is one of my favorites. This guy's called Fabrice Tour, and he also went by Fabulous Fab, a name he gave himself. And this is from 2008, so I know that for many of the students in the room, perhaps you were not so attentive to financial crisis stuff at the time. I looked for a picture of the guy where he wasn't smirking. I could not find it, and this was really a good faith attempt. This is these complex financial instruments that tanked the economy. And he said this in French, but here's the translation. I've managed to sell a few of these highly complex bonds to widows and orphans that I ran into at the airport. Apparently these Belgians adore synthetic asset-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations squared. He's now, after various permutations, actually a business professor in New York. Next. This is one that I'm not going to talk further about, but I'm absolutely fascinated by. Private equity as a business model, buying hospitals, and what happens. There's so much there that is potentially a business model that really does a lot of harm. Okay, so I start off trying to kind of define a notion of antisocial business models, because my whole shtick is there's all these business models that people get distressed about, go kind of nuts about, but what is it that they're really objecting to? And that's the thing that I want to try to understand. So I thought, well, let's try to define this. Contract law has a concept of when contracts are somehow unenforceable. And so I sort of took from that and started off saying, well, look, what constitutes a terrific contract, an ideal contract? First, the parties acting freely, is not lacking in either information or capacity. I don't mean they have full information. What would that mean? I don't know full capacity. What would that mean? So they have enough information or capacity. And you're not imposing burdens on third parties. It's not, I mean, A and B can just be, oh, this is totally great, but they're getting together to shaft C, and I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment. So your pro-social business model, and by pro-social I don't mean you're out to try to solve world peace, but just the thing that you're supposed to do, the thing that society wants you to do to be in business, the thing that makes society want to encourage business, is going to come out of a contract like this. So my better off is, here's some examples of the third party, what I call them third party burdenficiaries, in part to amuse my students. But like, let's take the second example, much easier example. So when the government makes these particular pollutants illegal, somebody figures out a way to change the molecule. The thing is just as toxic as the thing that was illegal, but this one, they haven't gotten to this one yet. And so you're going to make that. Well, that's still, within the confines of the law, but it has just the same problem as the last one. It's just that law hasn't gotten to it yet. And then I have this other example, and Eric knows this, my husband knows this example very well, because this happened to his mother. And I've been fuming about it. His mother died in 2014. This happened in 2012. And I've been fuming about this for 13 years. So the nursing home, his mother's in a nursing home, and there's these dentists who came to the nursing home, and lo and behold, all these 85-year-old little old ladies who don't really know where they are being told that they have serious dental problems. Now, of course, none of these people have capacity, so it's not like you can make a deal with them. They don't know where they are. So you get their relatives, and this is the Midwest, it's not New York, so these cute relatives are being told, important doctors think your relative should have this medical stuff. These are doctors. And anyway, it's just these women, and they were pretty much all women, they're not in pain, they're not uncomfortable. They don't need teeth like a 50-year-old. They need to sort of be in peace. But these dentists, obviously, the little old ladies and their relatives were not the ones paying, it was the government paying. So this is my third-party burdenficiary. There's a contract between two people, and who's getting shafted? The American taxpayer. And the patient's getting shafted too in all sorts of awful ways. So I want to divide my universe into three categories. First, the worst cases, the ones that pretty much everybody would agree, I think, are just antisocial. Then contested cases, and that's, I mean, to me this is very interesting, because it's like some people are outraged and other people think it's just fine. And I want to explore that. And then the end of the continuum, you know, the cure for cancer, the thing everybody thinks is just great. So, you know, you might ask, where is law in all of this? Well, sometimes the stuff's illegal, but people get caught if they do later on, and meanwhile the damage is done. Sometimes it's in a gray area, maybe people are kind of pushing the envelope, and sometimes it's just legal. I think certainly the forever chemical example I just gave you a moment ago, you're a week ahead of the regulators who are about to figure out that this new thing you're using is just as bad as the thing they outlawed. And tax schemes, another one of my favorites. I was a bit of a tax groupie in practice and actually remain so as a professor. I've actually taught partnership tax, which, believe it or not, is stunningly interesting. Many people don't think that. But a lot of it, you know, you think a lot about, you've got this rule, you're trying to pay less tax. Is that bad, not bad? Under what circumstances is it bad? So that's very much something that I think about, and I'm going to try to incorporate in the analysis of the book. Okay, why am I doing this anyway? Why am I looking to try to define this? Well, first, I have to admit, I'm just sort of a born taxonomist. This is what people in analytic philosophy, which is what I study, do. We're always sticking things in categories, so I always want to stick everything in a category. I mean, I even do this for hard liquor. I have my categories. I have one category, hard liquor that tastes like cough syrup, hard liquor that tastes like Christmas trees, and hard liquor that tastes like nail polish removers. I mean, I'm right, so I like categories. I find categories really interesting, like what's like what. So I want to identify these kind of things. And then I also think that with the contested cases, I mean, with the consensus cases, if they're not illegal, why not? And we should think about that. And the contested cases, it's really interesting to think about people's differing responses to those and what that means for policy. One of the big kinds of examples that I'm going to give you is sort of paternalism, personal responsibility complex of examples. How much are people chargeable with making appropriate deals for themselves? And I'll be giving you many examples. So what I want to try to do ultimately is at least have a better national conversation, and better yet, to get perhaps changes in law, but also perhaps changes in norms, societal pressure, pressure from shareholder constituencies, and so on. Okay, so some more examples. So most people consider these easy cases. I actually find the pharma case a little bit harder. This is where Purdue Pharma is trying to sell lots and lots of addictive OxyContin, and they're very much downplaying the risks. And you see this guy, I couldn't get through my day without it. And then the Wells Fargo ghost accounts, again, another US example where the employees were pressured to open accounts of existing account holders, but accounts that the existing account holders had not authorized and didn't know anything about. And then, of course, the Volkswagen defeat device, which just, I marvel at this. I mean, it is just sort of evil and artistry in one beautiful package. Here, they're saying, do people here know the story of the defeat device?
I don't know if the students will. Do you all know, Volkswagen?
Okay.
What the scandal was?
Okay, there's pressure and laws to have diesel not be so polluting. And people would like performance in their cars, but they also kind of need to abide by the law. The car companies need to abide by the law too. So the Volkswagen, and it wasn't just them, the other diesel manufacturers too, the engineers figure out a way to have the cars know whether they're being tested or driven, so that when they're being tested by regulators to see whether they comply with the low emission standards, oh, they're passing like crazy. But that's because the software says, oh, we are in testing mode. When the cars are actually being driven, they're emitting massive quantities of pollutants. So here's engineers who actually have this job of coming up with a device where the car knows whether it's being tested or driven and is able to adjust emissions accordingly. So it's really kind of remarkable. So I'm going to call these easy. And so on what basis am I calling them easy? Well, remember my definition before, or definitions. So I say, okay, first, what is the deal that they made with the various people? So first, I want to argue that there hasn't been, I mean, certainly with Purdue Pharma, the people they're dealing with immediately become addicts. So they're not acting freely, they don't have full capacity. The employees involved in Wells Fargo, they were told, if you don't open up these fake accounts, you're going to lose your job. So arguably that's something in the duress, less than acting freely department. In terms of full information, did they have full information? Well, there's some argument that the addiction risk was downplayed. You'll recall the slide I showed you where the guy said, oh, I take this stuff all the time. The account owner certainly didn't have full consent, to have full information. They didn't even consent. What about the hurt to third parties? Well, we've got the people breathing the polluted air. Certainly your classic, I'm just sitting there, a Volkswagen car passes by, and I'm third party burdenficiary. I did not bargain on this in any way. And those adversely affected by addiction and their families. Here we have their families are arguably these third party burdenficiaries. Here's some other easy cases, and this one I shouldn't say I'm fond of because it's really quite awful, but here's people who are getting money from being exposed to lead paint, and the money they're getting is a so-called structured settlement. That is, they're getting some amount per year, and a company is formed, the entire business model of which is to buy up those payments on the cheap. We'll give you $100,000 right now in order for you to give us your right to get $30,000 over 30 years or whatever it is. These are made up numbers. They are dealing with people who by definition got a settlement for being exposed to lead paint, which screwed up their brains and made them very bad at understanding what's good for them. So this is a situation where these people are actually being targeted because they don't have full capacity. Another example, apparently, this is the endless loop. Oh, sorry. This is the endless loop you get into in Amazon if you try to cancel Prime. They ended up having to pay a settlement on this one. I've never had this problem because I never try to cancel Prime. I love Prime. But you can't cancel it anyway. So this is all the screens you get when you try to cancel them. You have to go through this and this and this and this and this. And so they actually had a name for it. They called it the Iliad flow because it's such an epic to try to cancel this. And another example, phone calls from prison. This one really gets me. So first they make it, they get it made illegal for prisoners to have cell phones. They get really high prices for phone calls to or from inmates. They lobby. These are companies that are selling phone service to inmates. They enact and they maintain, they lobby to keep the laws that benefit them in place, including not that prisoners can't have phones, that the prices get to stay high. They lobby, they contribute to their favorite politicians. They offer kickbacks to the employees at the correctional agencies, and they structure the payments so that the employees get a percent of the revenue of the calls, hence making the employees want to have higher prices for the prisoners. So that's kind of an amazing one. Okay, let's so those are all kind of, I would say, pretty easy cases. And the reason I'm calling them easy is, again, remember my criteria previously about the really vulnerable people. People are they're physiologically impaired. They can't understand the deal. And the whole business model turns on buying from these people on the cheap, turns on buying the stream of payments for too little money. The cancellation. We had this thing when I was a kid, Roach Motel, this product that was sold. Anybody has Roach? No. So it was like this low-tech device with a lot of adhesive, and it would say, roaches come in and they can't come out. So, because they get stuck in the box. So these are called kind of Roach Motel kind of things. The cancellation, you get in, you can't get out. The phone calls from prison. Clearly, the prisoners don't exactly face a competitive bunch of phone suppliers. Am I like going way too long?
No, I think we should take Q&A in 5-10 minutes. Yeah?
Okay, 7 minutes. I will.
I have to take you to dinner, so you can't go over.
Okay, all right. So now let's get into harder cases. Casinos. So first, here's just some examples. The customers are losing huge quantities of money, and there's people who are assigned to deal with them, VIP hosts, because they're VIPs. They're losing a lot of money at the casino. And what does the gambling authority do? I mean, the casino do? It ups their credit limit, so they owe more money. And I have here a picture that's the backdrop of the previous slide. The picture is to show you what these casinos look like. There's no windows, there's no clocks, and there's a disorienting carpet. They do this on purpose. They go to conventions to discuss these kind of things, because the point is people get lost in the casino, they can't find their way out, they just gamble like crazy. So what makes this a harder case? Well, what do we want to say? The people walked into the casino themselves. Are they addicted? Do we really want to say everybody in these kind of circumstances are addicted? Lacking information or capacity. Again, do we really want to just say, okay, no personal responsibility? These people, the casino owners know how to make the casino seem attractive, and therefore, you're vulnerable to it. They shouldn't do that? I don't know. I find this hard. You can, though, get to so what makes the casino a harder case? Those things also, are we going to say they're imposing burdens on others? Well, sure, if somebody spends too much money, their relatives have to bail them out. That's a problem. But then again, lots of stupid things people do with their money. It means they're out of money and they look to their relatives to subsidize them. We can't get too capacious about this. You can get really awful things, though, that casinos do. Like, here are cases where they actually seek out people who've just gotten out of bankruptcy for gambling debts, and they send them chips and a coupon for a free meal, Or worse still, somebody puts themselves on a list that casinos keep. Don't let me in because I have no self-control, and they send those people chips and a coupon for a free breakfast. I mean, again, my concept of antisocial business model certainly includes picking out people who are vulnerable and addressing a business model to exploiting that vulnerability. So then we can have other cases, payday loans. Note that this says no credit checks, and the one on the right is a vacation thing. So like, oh, encouraging people to take out payday loans for vacations and say you can get the money every day. That's another hard case. What about people taking really awful jobs that are dangerous? And they're taking those jobs because they don't have any money. Again, things can easily get way too capacious. Wait, I'm sorry. Here we go. Yeah, so again, what do we want to say about this stuff? What's the problem? Is this like duress? If you have no money, you'll take just about any job, and the job's going to be terrible. If you have no money, you need a loan, you're going to take just about any terms. Again, this risks totally blowing up the concept. And I want to try to avoid that. I'm going to pass the drug pricing thing. And then here's some harder cases. I love this. This is a real place in Las Vegas. And there's some really salacious pictures that I did not show you of the outfits that the nurses, they're dressed in kind of sexy nurse outfits when they serve you. Anyway, so this is, as I say, this is a real place. And what do we want to say about this? Some people are like, how dare they? But nobody's forcing anybody to go there. Yes, it's true, they may drop dead at a higher rate, and then the relatives are bereaved. But again, what do we really want to say about this? But some people get pretty horrified by it. Abacus, we saw sneering Fabulous Fab previously, and so he sells exotic financial instruments that are bets on housing going up to sophisticated but known to be naive and starstruck buyers. And the disclosure says we may be on the other side of this trade, we may know things we haven't told you. In fact, they do know things they haven't told them, like that the person on the other side knew that the bet was a very bad one for these buyers. But again, what are we going to say about this? The buyers were sophisticated investors. They were entitled to ask for any disclosure they wanted. They signed something saying nobody didn't tell us stuff when we asked. They didn't have to buy it if they weren't happy with the disclosure. Who was hurt? Little old ladies who trusted the money managers. But again, what do we want to say about this? So all of this is just to say it's hard. Dynamic pricing, this one really sort of gets me, because a lot of people think it's just evil, 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 awful, awful, awful. I think it's very complicated. The water during the hurricane, there's terrible climate stuff, and then somebody jacks up the price of the water. People go nuts over this, much to say on this. The cab that cost 10 times as much on New Year's Eve, people go nuts about this. Again, these are complicated. Delta tries to get people who are rich to pay more money for the same airline seat. People are again going nuts about this. And so, you can ask, well, what's objectionable about this? Any of this stuff? Well, duress for the hurricane, okay, maybe. But other than that, is there any reason why the so-called same thing should always cost the same price? And is getting a cab on peak time the same thing as a cab not on peak time? I'm going to conclude now because I know I'm going on too long. I apologize. I'm so passionate about this subject. So where does this leave us? Well, I have some taxonomies here. And I'll just tell you one of them. The other one I'm just going to leave to you, leave it in case people want to ask about it, which is I want to distinguish between these different kinds of antisocial business models, taking advantage of circumstances or vulnerability, and I gave you a bunch of examples of that. Taking advantage of departures from fair dealing norm, that's like the Roach Motel cases, and taking advantage of third parties who should not be burdened. And again, examples of this. And this first category, which seems clearly right, taking advantage of vulnerable people, again, once you start saying people are vulnerable, who knows why they're vulnerable? They don't have so much money, they're particularly susceptible to drinking or to temptation or to gambling. Again, life gets very complicated very quickly. And part of my big aim is to make sense of that and to say, look, the lead paint sufferers and Eric's mother are people of a certain structural vulnerability sort, who I think everybody would agree trying to get deals with them is antisocial. Somebody who's just a little too tempted to drink too much or gamble too much, life gets more complicated there. Somebody whose financial situation is such that they take a pretty crummy job, again, things get much more complicated there. Take advantage of the fair dealing norms, again, the subscription problem, and also iPhone got into big trouble, Apple got into big trouble because they made the batteries decay too quickly, so people would need to replace their phones. It's very straightforward. Taking advantage of third parties, I talked a bit about that. And so just to get to my bottom line over here, lots of condemnation of business practices, and I want to understand what's condemned and why, where's their consensus, where's there more contestation, can we do better in dealing with this, and if so, with what tools? And with that, I thank you for your attention and apologize for going on too long.